Welcome back to Afternoon. A mountain of debt is a miserable wedding gift, but it is the reality for many newlyweds.
Studies show couples often underestimate the cost of their wedding and end up spending their time as newlyweds paying off debt, which I'm sure doesn't do your marriage very well. Joining us now with more on this is Jeff Schwartz, who is the Executive Director of Consolidated Credit Counseling Services of Canada. Good afternoon, Jeff.
Good afternoon.
Jeff, are you married?
I am. Happily.
So how much did you spend at your wedding?
That's a good question. It was over 20 years ago, and I think that it was probably somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000, somewhere in there.
Really? That long ago? That much money?
Yeah.
And now the average wedding costs even more than that.
It does. It's gone up. And it's a challenge for newlyweds, especially because I think as people age a little bit before they get married, they're covering more of the cost than their parents are.
Right. So what is the average cost of a wedding these days?
I think they say it's somewhere between $30,000 and $31,000, somewhere in there. It depends on the wedding you throw. I mean, it could be much more costly than that, or it probably could be even less than that as well.
But I understand people are not saving enough in anticipation.
Well, that's the issue. I think that part of it is, A, they're not saving enough, and perhaps they're thinking they'll cover it with credit card debt or even some help from their parents. But even worse so, they're counting on some wedding gifts and then using those to cover the costs of which can be the wedding, and that can be even riskier.
Right.
So really, they should be kind of putting the wedding off a little bit and looking at their budget and saving as much as they possibly can so they don't have to rely on those things to pay it off.
How many blenders can you take back to the store to get money to pay for your wedding?
Yeah.
You might need a few.
Okay, Jeff, I'll let you in on something. The three of us talking, I'm the only one who's not married. But what
Ouch.
No, ouch, look how much money I've saved. Looking at people I have known over the years who've gotten married, when they plan the wedding, it seems like they go in with the best of intentions, and then it just seems to get out of control. Oh, we need to invite this person. Oh, we need to do that. Oh, wait a minute, we should do this.
You know, and that's not surprising because many of these people have been planning their wedding for most of their lives, so they want it to be absolutely everything and a little bit more than they dreamed of going into it. And they forget that there's a cost associated with everything that they want.
So, Jeff, how much debt does the average couple come out of their wedding with?
Well, it really depends on how much they put down, but I think what we're seeing is that they're planning on contributing about 60% of the cost of the wedding, and many of them on the other 40% really haven't looked to how that's going to get covered. And what we're seeing is that somewhere in and around kind of 10 to 15% is ending up on credit cards, and that 19% interest, that can be really quite costly.
Now, I guess it depends, obviously, on a person's income. Two people who get married who are, relatively well off, it's not going to bother them as much as opposed to someone who's not relatively well off. But in your experience and with what you know, what would be a good price for a wedding that most people could handle and not be in too much debt?
Well, like you said, it's going to depend on the people. But I want to go back and say that if you're planning a wedding and you've got time, I think that if you were to put away, say, 15 to 20% of your income on a combined basis, and you could reasonably live within that by saving that amount, and perhaps do that a year in advance, that's going to give you a pretty good idea about how much you can afford to spend on the wedding.
Right. And then you should spend just that, shouldn't you, instead of more?
Well, that's the idea. I referred to some people counting on their wedding gifts to pay for their wedding. Well, that's a pretty risky venture. And truth be told, I mean, you're probably more excited about buying that leather sofa or that big screen TV for your wedding home as opposed to using it to pay for the wedding.
See, I think, that's kind of a bad thing to do. It's like sitting with your future spouse. Oh, boy, I hope my aunt gives me something expensive so I can take it back and hawk it at the pawn shop.
Maybe they're hoping for financial gifts.
I guess so.
Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Good advice. Or your advice would be just don't get married, right?
It worked for me. That's all I got to say.
Never say never, my friend. You don't know what's around the corner.
I know what you're saying. Yeah.